All right. Sorry, we're a bit late to start off. My name is Jose Cormier. I'm the Nature for All coordinator, and we're getting ready to start our next section of the Nature for All Love Fest finale. I'm going to bring our moderator for this next interview, Lais Fleury. Hi, Lais. How are you?
Hi, Jose. Very happy to be here. Thank you
Thank
so
you so
much
much.
for this invitation to share our love for nature, that it's a common ground that we share, right?
Exactly. I'm really excited. I hope the technology will work. We have a next guest, and this will be fun because I'm going to disappear, and then Lais is going to start doing this interview in Portuguese. Our one interview in Portuguese. So I'm looking forward to hearing this. And so I'm going to turn it over to Lais, and then we'll bring in our next interviewer and off.
Ok. Oi, Isabel. Tudo bem? Você está conseguindo me ouvir?
Olá. Sim, tudo bem. Sim.
Que bom.
Tá.
Acho que a audiência vai ter a oportunidade de escutar dois portugueses diferentes, né? Com diferentes sotaques.
Exatamente.
Ô, Isabel, mas me conta um pouco de você, me conta um pouquinho quem você é, o que você faz, de onde que você mora, de onde você está falando, que a gente gostaria de te conhecer um pouco.
Ok. Bom, sou Isabel Fortes, bióloga marinha, sou cabo-verdiana, natural da ilha de Santo Antão, mas neste momento eu moro na ilha de São Vicente, que é uma ilha vizinha, onde eu trabalho. Fez?
E quantos anos você tem? Você tem filhos, não tem filhos?
Ok. Tenho 34 anos e tenho uma filha de 2 anos e 2 meses. Ainda é bem pequenininha.
Isabel, me conta um pouco onde que você trabalha, que eu acho que tem, né, obviamente bastante conectado com a natureza, e conta um pouco, além de onde você trabalha, do que você faz, o que você acha que foi importante, assim, na sua vida para você ter essa conexão profunda com a natureza. Quando você fala, por exemplo, que você é bióloga marinha, de onde que você acha que nasceu esse desejo, né, na sua vida de ser bióloga marinha? O que te conecta com essa escolha?
Bom, a minha história, por acaso, pelo menos no meu trabalho, todos gostam da minha história e por isso que a diretora me incentivou a participar e a contar a história, porque para além de ser bióloga marinha, sou filha de um pescador, porque eu nasci numa pequena vila pescatória e o meu pai é pescador. Para além de ser pescador, é um antigo caçador da cagarra, que é uma espécie endêmica que nós temos aqui em Cabo Verde. Bom, e quando eu era mais pequeno, ainda estava no secundário, o meu pai sempre participava das reuniões que ele ia, porque ele fazia parte da direção da Associação de Pescadores. E sempre que ele ia para as reuniões, ele trazia sempre aqueles panfletos com informações, sempre com um tema ambiental, porque tinha alguns ONGs que faziam sensibilização nas comunidades e ele sempre participava. E ele levava estes folhetos e entregava sempre para mim, de todos era a mim que ele entregava. Então, veio essa coisa. Para além de eu crescer numa pequena vila, pronto, é pescatório, sempre tive contacto com o mar, por isso sempre quis fazer uma coisa, tipo, uma profissão que tivesse a ver com o oceano. Então, depois, com as informações que eu consegui com o meu pai, que ele sempre levava os folhetos, então fui adquirindo mais informações e quando eu terminei o 12º, acho que não foi assim tão difícil escolher um curso, porque eu já queria algo que tinha a ver com o oceano. Então, eu escolhi Biologia Marinha. Mas pronto, não é só essa parte que faz a minha história um pouquinho mais excitante, porque, como eu tinha dito anteriormente, para além de ser filha de pescador, o meu pai é um antigo caçador. Então, era uma tradição que existia na minha comunidade, em que os pescadores, pelo menos no mês de outubro, eles saíam da ilha que eles moravam para outra ilha à procura da cagarra, que é uma espécie de ave marinha que nós temos aqui, é endémica de Cabo Verde. Então, eles saíam para fazer a captura dessa ave para fins alimentares. E cada vez tinha mais procura dessa ave para comer, porque eles capturavam as aves e depois eles vendiam, e cada vez havia mais procura. Então, foi uma coisa uma preocupação enorme também, principalmente para a ONG, que agora estou a trabalhar, com muito orgulho, que eles começaram a fazer campanhas de sensibilização, principalmente na minha comunidade, e teve uma vez que o meu pai participou numa dessas campanhas de sensibilização. E ele encontrou o presidente, que é o José Melo, que é o fundador da Biosfera, onde eu trabalho. Ele disse, olha, eu tenho uma filha e ela está a fazer biologia marinha, eu acho que ela gostaria de trabalhar na vossa ONG. E o José Melo disse, ok, diz para ela para depois passar ali. Então, pronto, eu estava no meu primeiro ano de curso, eu fui lá falar com o José Melo, que é o fundador da Biosfera, que foi o primeiro ONG com a ajuda de outras entidades nacionais e outros entes. Eles conseguiram proibir a caça da cagarra, porque era uma atividade, se eles continuassem a fazer aquilo, a espécie podia vir a extinguir. Ainda por cima é uma espécie endémica de Cabo Verde, ou seja, que só colocava os ovos aqui em Cabo Verde. Então, pronto, eu lá fui falar com o José Melo e depois eu fiquei ali a fazer estágio durante um ano. Primeiro, comecei a trabalhar com proteção de tartarugas. Passei 3 meses na ilha de Santa Luzia, que é uma ilha deserta, já. Depois que eu terminei o trabalho de proteção das tartarugas, eu fui para o Ilhéu Raso, que é um ilhéu pequenino que fica perto de Santa Luzia, e que, pronto, eu passei lá um mês. Também é deserto, não há luz, tem internet, mas é limitado, não há água potável, nós tínhamos que usar água, pronto, a água doce era para beber e cozinhar, o resto tinha que ser tudo com água do mar. Eu consegui ficar ali um mês, e pronto, ali eu trabalhava com cagarra, que era a espécie que eles capturavam antigamente, e o meu pai era um dos pescadores que fazia essa captura. Bom, eu fiquei lá um mês a trabalhar, consegui, pronto, fui familiarizando, conheci a espécie, algumas informações que eu não sabia, que eu logo pensei, de certeza os pescadores eles proibiram a caça da cagarra, mas estas informações de certeza eles não sabem. Então eu acho que eu tenho que pelo menos transmitir algumas dessas informações e dizer porque é que eles fizeram a proibição da captura da captura da ave. E pronto, foi assim que eu escolhi a biologia, assim que eu entrei na biosfera. Antes eu era só coordenadora do acampamento, eu ficava no acampamento e tinha uma equipa que, pronto, nós passávamos pelo menos do mês de junho a mês de novembro a fazer proteção das aves marinhas no Ilhéu. Mas depois, com o tempo, eu fiquei coordenadora do programa de aves, não só de aves marinhas e também de aves migratórias ou aves terrestres. E pronto, foi assim que eu enverguei nessa área.
E quando a pesca foi proibida, né, das cagarras, como que ficou seu pai? Porque ele não era um grande pescador, ele foi um confronto para ele, não foi? Conta um pouco essa perspectiva.
Muitas pessoas às vezes dizem, tu não tiveste problema com o teu pai, principalmente ao escolher biologia marinha, ainda por cima trabalhar na ONG que fez guerra com os pescadores, é que proibiram a captura da cagarra. Felizmente, eu não tive nenhum problema com o meu pai, nem mesmo ao escolher o curso, nem mesmo ao entrar na biosfera, até porque foi ele que me ajudou a entrar na biosfera e, como eu tinha dito anteriormente, desde sempre ele foi incentivando, como se ele me ajudou a escolher a área e que ele sempre passava as informações, por isso nós não tivemos nenhum problema até agora. E, bom, falando no pai, mas eu sei, pelo menos nós nem sempre conseguimos sensibilizar todas as pessoas, sempre tem pessoas que ainda tem aquela coisa, vocês não deviam ter feito isso porque é uma renda familiar para as outras pessoas, nós percebemos isso, tudo bem, Mas pronto, é que eu sempre digo, aliás, quando eu ia para a minha zona, eu sempre falava com os pescadores ou as pessoas que moram na zona, é que eu transmitia as informações, dizia o que é a cagarra, porque é que nós fizemos aquilo, porque a cagarra é uma ave marinha, que só coloca os ovos aqui em Cabo Verde e que passa 7 anos para colocar um ovo. Eu só coloco um ovo e não 2 ou 3, como muitos pensavam. Então, eram informações que eles desconheciam. Então, com isso, pronto, alguns ficaram entendidos, né? Posso dizer assim, mas, claro, nem sempre conseguimos consciencializar todos. Mas é isso.
Isabel, e seu pai, por exemplo, quando foi proibido a caça, ele conseguiu ter outro tipo de renda ou não? Porque eu entendo também que ele dependia da caça.
Sim, mas eles não só dependiam da caça, eles faziam pesca normalmente, só que no mês de outubro, no outubro e novembro, eles iam para o ilhéu raso, que é ilhéu raso e ilhéu branco, que era os ilhéus é que eles podiam capturar a cagarra, só que eles iam no período reprodutor, aliás, que era quando já tinham crias, já havia somente crias no ninho, os progenitores já vinham para a terra poucas vezes, eles já aproveitavam para capturar as crias. Por isso é que eles faziam o pesca o ano todo, mas no mês de outubro e novembro eles iam para o ilhéu raso. Só que depois dessa captura, pronto, eles continuaram a fazer a pesca, mas não é a mesma coisa porque a renda que eles conseguiam com a captura da cagarra tinha famílias que conseguia sustentar pelo menos quase um ano ou metade do ano com o dinheiro. E era uma tradição que cada vez havia mais pessoas à procura da cagarra e cada ano ficava mais caro. Mas pronto, era algo que tinha que ser feito. Tinha que ser feito.
Acho que esse que é o desafio, né? E aí eu acho que eu também tive uma informação que além, você gosta de observar pássaros também, Isabel? Você é uma bird watcher, né, que a gente chama.
Sim. Para além de... Bom, como eu tinha dito, antes eu era apenas a coordenadora do acampamento do ilhéu raso. Só trabalhava com aves marinhas. Mas depois que eu, pronto, comecei a gostar de observar aves, nós começámos a fazer birdwatching aqui em São Vicente. Tem uma área que é ETAR, que é a Estação de Tratamento de Águas Residuais, que alberga uma grande diversidade de espécies de aves. Então, nós vamos lá pelo menos 2 vezes por mês fazer observação. Nós costumamos levar pessoas para conhecer as aves migratórias, fazemos sensibilização nas escolas e outras coisas. E agora estamos a pensar em fazer uma torre de observação, pronto, que facilita muito, dá para... Desculpa. As pessoas conseguem ver melhor as aves e também na questão da recolha de dados também vai facilitar-nos muito porque podemos trabalhar montar redes, fazer capturas e ir lá fazer o trabalho, assim não ficamos expostos. Mas pronto, isso é para o futuro mas está nos planos.
Ô, Isabel, e da mesma forma que o seu pai, por exemplo, te inspirou bastante em relação a esse contato com a natureza, tal, você acha que é algo que você consegue transmitir também para sua filha ou não?
Sim. Eu não vou dizer talvez, sim, porque eu quero levá-la, mesmo assim, em contato com a natureza. Se eu pudesse, eu já levava para o campo, mas não posso porque ainda ela está muito pequena. Mas não é só por isso, porque no lugar onde nós trabalhamos com conservação, fica um pouco distante de São Vicente, que aí nós temos já a base. E pronto, depois nós temos que ir de barco, e leva 4 ou 6 horas de barco, e mesmo tem alguns lugares que é difícil acesso. Na hora de desembarque é um pouco complicado, então estou à espera que ela faça mais uns aninhos e depois eu começo a levar para o campo, para ela ter esse contato com a natureza. Mesmo aqui em São Vicente, se tiver oportunidade, ela vai comigo.
Qual que é a idade dela?
Tem 2 anos.
Ah, é pequenininha, então.
Sim, ainda é pequenininha.
Mas aonde ela mora, ela consegue ter contato com a natureza, assim? Você acha que é algo que você faz questão de oferecer para ela? Como é que você acha nesse sentido, em relação a esse
Aqui
contato
em
com a
São
natureza?
Vicente, nós ficamos, pelo menos estamos perto do mar. Eu adoro estar no mar, é o meu lugar preferido. Eu fico mais calma, tenho uma tranquilidade. E ela também adora estar na praia. Porque quando chegamos na praia, ela fica toda, eu nem sei explicar, fica toda feliz quando vai para a água, não quer sair da água, fica a brincar na areia. Então eu acho que não vai ser uma coisa assim difícil de incentivá-la, tipo estar sempre em contato com a natureza, não só, ou então observar aves quando estou aqui a preparar as coisas para fazer birdwatching. Ela tem sempre aquela curiosidade de colocar os binóculos. Então temos um programa na biosfera que é SOS Edu, Edu que é o nome da cagarra. Então, quando as pessoas encontram as cagarras no chão, principalmente na época reprodutora, que a luz artificial deixa-os desorientados e acabam por bater nos postes. E às vezes eles caem. Então, temos aquela preocupação das pessoas, quando encontrar uma ave perdida ou machucada, eles podem entregar na biosfera. E às vezes as pessoas vêm entregar aqui na minha casa. Então, tenho que cuidar da ave e pronto, a Naomi está aqui, às vezes ela brinca com a ave até que eu vá libertá-la. Então, eu acho que ela não tem por onde fugir. Espero que continue assim.
E você tem irmãos, irmãs?
Sim, tem duas irmãs e 2 irmãos.
E eles
E
também têm...
o meu marido, ele não é biólogo, mas ele trabalha na ONG onde eu trabalho, que é a Biosfera, Conservação da Natureza. Então, como eu digo, ela não tem por onde fugir. Sou bióloga, trabalho na biosfera, o meu marido também trabalha na biosfera, então a Naomi provavelmente vai seguir o ramo.
E você acha que, assim, os seus irmãos, eles também têm esse contato próximo com a natureza, como você teve? Assim, eles tiveram esse amor pela natureza ou não? Está me escutando, Isabel? Caiu?
Did we lose Isabel?
I think so, maybe.
That's too
I
bad.
think it dropped.
She dropped her something and then it disappeared.
Yeah, it seems. Let's see if she comes back up.
She can come back.
Yeah.
It sounds like you were having a wonderful conversation. I probably understood about 3 words of it, but
Yeah,
it's really
very
interesting.
interesting.
I'll have to learn Portuguese.
Yeah, that will be like an inspiration for you. Then you can come to Brazil and travel around Cabo Verde as well.
and Portugal as well. So I have a friend of mine is from Brazil, so I should bug him to teach me.
Yeah.
So as we wait, oh no, let's see if she's able to log back in. We'll give her a couple more minutes, but yeah, like maybe while we wait, maybe you can bring me in about some of the things that she talked about. I'd be curious to know a little bit about her work.
She was telling me that her father, he used to be a fisherman, and not only a fisherman, but he also liked to hunt. And in the school that she used to study, he would go there like every week just to share some folders that he had about this bird, especially bird. I think the name is cagarra, that it's from there. It's an endemic species that her father used to also hunt this bird. So she was sharing that she grew up like seeing her father as a fisherman and bringing her to the ocean. And also like in the school, she would see her father every day, like not every day, but every week, sharing this information about the birds. So she got very into it. I think she thinks that her connection to nature came a lot from childhood.
Right.
And her father met the founder of Biosphere, the organization that she works for, and he was looking for someone to work in the organization. And her father said, "Oh, I have my daughter. I think she might be very interested." And she started to work with them as a trainee. And the funny part of it is that Biosphere, one of the works of Biosphere is to avoid the hunting of the cagarras, because
Nice.
it was a an endemic bird from there, but
Okay.
people were like hunting so many of them that she can, so she's back.
Well, she's
That
back.
they had
So thank
to
you.
put some rules.
Nice. So Isabel, Lais was just sharing some of the information. So I'm going to step out, let you finish your conversation. Sorry, you had a couple of technical difficulties there, but I'll let you go back to your conversation. It sounded amazing.
Ok,
You,
desculpa.
Imagina. Isabel, o que eu estava te perguntando é que você tem irmãos e irmãs, e aí eu gostaria de saber se eles também têm essa conexão profunda com a natureza, se eles trabalham mais ou menos nesse mesmo campo, só para a gente entender um pouco como é que esse contato, inspiração que você teve na infância se reverberou para eles também.
Bom, a minha irmã, ela resolveu fazer gestão hoteleira e turismo.
Uhum.
Exatamente. O meu irmão mais novo, no início, ele queria fazer o curso Ciências Náuticas e Pilotagem, mas depois ele acabou por desistir porque tem uma deficiência numa perna, então disseram que não era muito apropriado. Então, pronto, ele agora resolveu fazer língua francesa. Mas pronto, ele está sempre em contato também com o mar, ele é mergulhador, sim, ele está, pronto. Como eu disse, nós estamos sempre em contato com o mar. O meu irmão, o outro irmão, ele fez filosofia, e a minha irmã mais velha trabalha no hotel. Ela que não fez nenhum curso, mas pronto, está perto do mar.
Está perto do mar, porque trabalha também com turismo, né?
Exatamente.
Hotelaria. E tem alguma passagem, assim, da sua infância, quando você estava com seu pai, por exemplo, quando seu pai pescava, que é algo que você sempre lembra, assim, que é algo que você guarda no seu coração, que é uma memória que você leva, assim, para o resto da vida?
Assim, lembrança é quando ele ia para o mar, por exemplo, quando ele ia para o mar e nós, sempre que ele chegava na terra, nós íamos buscar os peixes, ficávamos ali a ajudar a trabalhar os peixes, depois íamos para casa. E antes diziam, aquele peixe, qual é o nome daquele peixe? Porque eu, antes de eu fazer o curso de biologia, eu já conhecia nomes de muitos peixes. Então, como eu digo, antes de ir para a biologia, eu já sabia algumas coisas. A escolha não foi assim tão difícil, porque eu já queria algo mesmo que tivesse a ver com o oceano, que conseguisse explorar, que conseguisse saber mais coisas sobre o mar. É isso, por isso eu tenho que agradecer ao meu pai, não só, mas principalmente a ele, porque neste momento estou a trabalhar na biosfera, tenho muito orgulho disso, e o meu pai também, ele gosta de dizer, tenho uma filha bióloga e ela trabalha na biosfera. Meu Deus, quando ele fala isso, eu fico mesmo orgulhosa também, e ele também. E uma coisa que eu esqueci de dizer, os pescadores, quando proibiram a caça, mas a biosfera continuam a fazer sensibilização. E hoje nós temos pelo menos 5 em 5 anos, temos uma atividade que nós temos de fazer, que é censo populacional. Mesmo os pescadores é que nos ajudam, porque eles é que conhecem melhor os lugares, então uma forma de mostrar que eles ficaram também sensibilizados e que queriam ajudar na proteção dessas aves. Então eles juntaram-se à biosfera e eles nos ajudam a fazer o censo, que é a contagem também de indivíduos ou de aves marinhas que nós temos no Ilhéu Raso ou no Ilhéu Branco.
E quando que você teve contato com Nature for All? Faz tempo que você tem contatos? Como que você, assim, se o Nature for All faz sentido para o seu trabalho? Como é que é essa relação com Nature for All?
É assim, para ser sincera, eu já sabia que a biosfera é membro da Nature for All, só que eu não tinha aquela ligação, ir nos sites e nas páginas ver o que elas faziam, que faziam. Então, depois que a Nadina me disse, que é a diretora, disse, acho que tu é que vais ser a contadora da história, porque tens uma história. Mas por que eu? Não, vais ser tu tens uma história bastante interessante, acho que vale a pena. Eu disse, ok. Então, a partir daquele momento, até uns meses atrás, eu comecei a pesquisar e sempre a seguir as páginas, e então eu achei bastante interessante mesmo a forma como eles tentam mostrar para as pessoas e como trabalham com as comunidades, mostrar que a natureza não é restrita, pertence a todos nós e que nós podemos tirar benefícios dela sem prejudicá-la, sendo respeitá-la, valorizando, e isso dá-nos tipo uma responsabilidade, porque quando se está em contato com a natureza e quando se gosta de alguma coisa, nós temos que preservar, é isso. Por isso eu gosto, pelo menos o jeito que eles fazem, que mostra como isso é possível.
Uhum. E pelo seu trabalho, que você é coordenadora, né, das atividades de aves marinhas, eu imagino que você tem que trabalhar bastante em campo, né, Isabel? E como que é para você essa relação da maternidade com o trabalho de campo? Que deve ser tão desafiante, né?
Agora sim, agora é um desafio e antes, quando eu não tinha a Naomi, eu ia para o campo, eu passava até 3 meses no campo. 3 meses não, 2 meses e tal, nunca cheguei a 3 meses. Mas eu ficava ali, pelo menos eu gosto de ir para o Leão Raso, não tem luz, não, a não ser na luz natural, posso mergulhar, coisa também que eu gosto de fazer. Não temos água doce, tá bem, mas pronto, nós usamos água do mar para tomar banho e fazer outras coisas. Internet é limitada e quando eu chego ali eu sinto-me mesmo tranquila. É difícil pensar em problemas. Eu consigo, às vezes as pessoas ficam a dizer, mas como é que tu consegues passar 2 meses num lugar assim? Mas eu sinto-me em casa. Às vezes eu tinha que voltar para a cidade porque às vezes eu tinha que vir, porque senão eu podia ficar ali. Mas agora fica complicado. Agora eu tenho uma filha e pelo menos desde que ela nasceu não tenho conseguido ir pelo menos para o campo, mas isso, já estou a planear ir. Só está um pouquinho complicado sair agora, mas eu não quero deixar de ir para o campo, porque pronto, eu também ficar no escritório não é assim tão mal, porque eu aprendi outras coisas e tinha coisas que há muito tempo que eu queria aprender, então eu aproveitei esse tempo para aprender mais e agora eu já consigo ir para o campo, trabalhar no escritório, mas eu não quero deixar o campo fora, porque eu preciso ir para o campo, eu preciso estar em contato com a natureza, é isso.
Mas quando a gente gosta, né, a gente sente muita falta mesmo, né? Mas eu
Exatamente.
imagino que você consiga levar. É porque são 4 horas, 6 horas de barco, é bem longe também, né, Isabel? Não dá para ir e voltar.
Exatamente. E quando nós não temos, porque nós temos uma embarcação, e quando não se consegue ir no nosso barco, normalmente nós temos que ir em botes artesanais, que é a vela ou a motor, embarcações de 7 metros, boca aberta. E às vezes, pronto, até demoramos menos com o nosso barco. Mas mesmo assim, é uma distância bem considerável. Por isso, não é uma boa ideia levar a Naomi agora para o campo. Mas aqui em São Vicente, se conseguir, ela vai, não há problema. Isso eu
E você
garanto.
acha que a pesca, para os pescadores locais, a pesca ainda é uma atividade valorizada? Como é que está esse confronto assim dos pescadores com a vida atual? Assim, ainda é uma tradição que é preservada?
É assim, depois que eles proibiram a caça da cagarra, pronto, os
Uhum.
pescadores ficaram a pescar perto da localidade, mas como eu disse, não é a mesma coisa. Às vezes eles saem de manhã, por exemplo, às 7 e voltam às 4 e às vezes trazem pouco peixe, muito pouco peixe, e às vezes eles ficam a reclamar, alguns assim. Mas agora, tem pouco, por exemplo, há pouco tempo, que até o meu pai tinha dado uma entrevista e depois eles mencionaram a parte que agora eles são poucos marinheiros e não há jovens a seguir este ramo,
Ai,
porque
que pena. Uhum.
exatamente eles estão ali, já estão cada vez mais velhos e não há jovens que querem seguir essa profissão. Então, Não sei, talvez já há mais de uns anos na minha localidade, provavelmente, não sei se vai ter pescadores. Até porque é normalmente os pais, mesmo os pescadores, eles sempre incentivam os filhos a dizer: olha, pelo menos o meu pai sempre disse isso. Estudem, estudem, porque eu não quero que vocês levem essa vida cansada que eu tenho, sair da manhã e voltar à tarde, ou sair e voltar a 2 dias depois. Eu quero que vocês estudem agora que têm oportunidade para conseguir um trabalho. Por isso é que estou a dizer, alguns filhos dos pescadores, a maioria, tipo, eles estudaram, conseguiram um emprego. Os outros que ficaram, que não conseguiram fazer curso, eles conseguiram outro tipo de emprego, ou então, pronto, alguns mergulham, fazem mergulho, mas seguir a parte pesca, mesmo pesca, como o meu pai ou os outros companheiros, eu acho difícil daqui a uns anos.
Entendi. Isabel, adoraria continuar conversando com você, mas a gente tem que encerrar, que o nosso tempo já acabou.
Tá bem.
Queria super agradecer a sua participação. Enquanto a gente conversava, eu naveguei aqui no site da Biosfera, vi uma fotinha aqui da cagarra, né, que é a cagarra de Cabo Verde, que é a espécie que você compartilhou bastante. Mas então, obrigada pela sua história, obrigada pelo trabalho.
Obrigada eu por essa oportunidade.
Muito feliz de conhecer.
Eu também.
Bom, então.
Muito obrigada. Obrigada.
Olá,
Tchau,
Isabel.
tchau.
Muito obrigado.
Tchau.
Ciao.
Tchau, tchau.
Lais, that sounded like a lot of fun. I'm so glad you could join us for this. But we're not done with you, are we?
No, we are not.
We're going to turn the table. We're going to turn the tables on you now, and give you the opportunity to share your love of nature story. So, I mean, tell me a little bit about yourself. I have a PowerPoint presentation. If you tell me when you want to put it on.
Yeah, I think we can start from that. Actually, Isabel gave me this idea, actually, that, maybe I can share a presentation about my journey, my life. This was a small presentation that I did for Alana. In Alana, the organization that I work for, we had these pecha kucha moments, that's how we say. And I was able to share my love of nature, like how I was raised, and maybe that's why I'm still working in the environment area. So if I'm happy, like if you can share, I can go from there, Jose, and we can do like a journey. So this is me with this little baby, with my family. I have 2 sisters, so we are in 3. And my grandparents, they used to be farmers, especially my grandfather. He used to be a farmer, so you can pass it on. So I was raised, so when I was young, my father, he has this land that it was very close to where we lived. It was like a little farm, and it was like the passion of my life, the love of my life. I always wanted to go there every weekend. So I was raised in this land. This is a picture. I was like this little blonde girl over there. So a place that I would go every weekend. Today is already integrated to the city, because the city, I'm from Brazil. I was born in Goiânia, and the farm is already like an urban part of Goiânia. Unfortunately, the city grew very much. But what I think, Jose, is that the fact that my father had this land and I had the opportunity to go there very often, it was really where my connection to nature started. And I remember, like, when I was younger, even if I didn't have any friend or any cousin, or even if my sisters didn't want to go with me, I would make sure that I would go by myself, So I have lots of memories going to this place, like in the afternoon, like during the weekend, and riding horses by myself, but really like contemplating nature and having fun. So I think this Richard Wolff likes to talk about that, right? The habitat of your heart. So I think this is the habitat of my heart, like where my connection with nature started from. So you can go to the next slide. So where I was born, like in Goiânia, if I was not in the farm, I would go to a club, like a place that we would have swimming pools, and a big green area. So I was always outside. And also when I used to live in a house that I had like a big backyard where for example, I learned how to bike. So my life was very much outside. So I think this is also nurture a lot my connection to nature. You can go to the next one, to the next one. I think this would not. Yeah, and then another aspect that it's really like forms the puzzle. Every July we would go to this river. The name is Araguaia, and we would camp as a family. So every July in Goiânia, it's very interesting and very funny because you can, like, in, for example, from May and on, you start seeing the advertisement of camping gears, and like in the TV and also in the outdoor. It's very cultural, and it still is. Like the camping, it's also on there, and now it's a little bit like a different camp. Now it's more sophisticated. The way that people camp there is not so rude. And but I have beautiful memories going to Araguaia, this river, and camping there for like a month, with my family. So this was, I think, was very important for my connection to nature as well. So then you can go to the next slideshow. And then this was the Goiânia, the city that I was born. And as you see, it's very urbanized right now. And then at some point, I thought Goiânia was like a little bit like, when you have the feeling that I was born like in not the correct place, because I didn't like Goiânia very much. I like the surroundings, like the nature. And I said, no, I don't think I want to live here. But I also want to have like the experience to live in a big city. So I moved to São Paulo, and
wow.
where 18 million people live there. But then I was able to also like just take advantage of a different aspect of my life, just getting to know people a lot and taking a lot of opportunities and starting to work. You can go to the next slide. um, and then, Jose, when I was in the university, I remember I was like walking in the universe, like the first day I did business, and then there was like a paper, like stick on the wall, and the paper was asking this: if you like to travel, send me an email. A paper like that, like a sign like that. I said, wow, I love to travel. So I'm going to send an email to this person. I said, hey, I'm Lais. I love to travel, and then I started a conversation with this person. And then I realized that I was part of a selection, like I was part of like a guide hiring selection that he was planning to do, just to invite Brazilians to write the first backpacking guide in Portuguese. And then I got selected to help to write this backpack guide. The name is O Viajante, is like a backpacker. And it was the first backpacking guide in Portuguese. So I had this opportunity to travel in Europe, like Italy, France, and Portugal and Greece. So it was amazing, because then it was my first experience here abroad, traveling by myself. And I went to the Greece islands. I went to the Amalfitane coast. It was an amazing experience. You can go to the next one, because I as I love to travel, and this was like an amazing opportunity for me. And then when I was traveling there, a friend of mine, when I came back to Brazil, I really wanted to keep traveling, or at least working with something that would help me to travel more. And then I met this person. His name is Alberto Alves, and he was a very clever guy, because he was a surfer, but he was also a photographer. And his father owns like a company in Brazil, like an engineering company. And what he did, he would apply for the grants of his father's company, in like these laws that usually when you invest, you can have tax deduction and tax benefits. So this was one way that I could found, like, because Alberto, he was very clever, because so he would say, okay, so I'm gonna go to Bali and surf for a month, and just like be surfing there. But on the other side, I'm gonna publish a book because I'm a photographer, and my father can just sponsor like this book, and I have all the costs paid, and my father would have tax benefits, like tax deduction. So I thought it was super clever, and it was very inspirational for me. And I worked for him for maybe like 2 years, learning how to develop cultural projects and how to get sponsors and that they could have tax benefits. And then after that said, okay, so now I'm going to do my own work. And I had two big passions, that it was nature and also traveling. So then you can go for the next. So then I met these two friends, Fofa and Sylvia, and we started a non-profit organization that the name is Firefly Expedition. So pretty much what we did, we traveled for 10 months straight in the Amazon, developing a social project in the Amazon with the rural communities there, and different communities, like indigenous communities, river communities, like always like communities that live very, very far, that you need to maybe like travel for 8 days or 8 hours, 10 hours to reach. And our social project was to implement and to deliver libraries to these communities with books for children. And we would spend like 1 week in these communities just training volunteers to how they could use the books to stimulate kids to like to read, so you can go. So I was like 26 years old, maybe like 20 years. This happened like 20 years ago. And this is the map that, as you can see, for the whole Amazon region in Brazil. And we did an expedition for 10 months straight. The three of us, we had the partnership of the Air Force in Brazil, that they would help us to fly because not necessarily was easy to reach all these destinations, but it was a very beautiful year of my life, because I was immersed in nature. I was like getting to know the Amazon, something that it was my dream, but also getting to know the people who lived in the Amazon. And because by that time, imagine 20 years ago, we, as a Brazilian, we would only hear about like the nature, the flora, but not necessarily who would live there, So,
Right.
and then so you can go for them. So these, I think I have some pictures about, like, yes, you see, like working with the projects, like this is the library that we will deliver. This is like the kids, this is our like indigenous kids receiving the books that we were offering to them. And this is the type of community that we used to work. As you see, that they are very rural and very small. And these are the main transportation that we used to go there, so you can go to the next one. So then after that, my passion for nature like really grew, and I became an outdoor instructor. And I worked for Outerbound, and I worked for Knowles as well, just teaching like leadership. Being an outdoor instructor, I worked for them for maybe like 5-6 years, and it was really it was amazing. Like, so I had an opportunity to get to know in beautiful and incredible places, wilderness, like very immersed in nature, and
Right.
working with education. So it was really fun, And then with Knowles, you can go to the next one. I I so this is Attila. He was the person who brought Knowles to Brazil, and he developed Knowles expedition in the Amazon. And I was hired by him to help to develop Knowles expedition in the Amazon. and then that's how I met him, and today we are married. So that's how I met my husband. So we started
Nice.
like traveling maybe for 40 days straight, like navigating in the rivers in the Amazon, and I helped them to set up the cultural section, like when the students would come to the villages and stay with the communities there. So this is one of the examples that I was explaining to the communities, that they would receive like kids from United States, that they would not speak Portuguese, but then if they were happy to receive them. So it was amazing. So when
I
I
bet.
met Angela, we were able to travel around the world, and we worked
Yeah.
together in Alaska, we worked together in Patagonia, in the Amazon, in Mexico, just doing outdoor activities and teaching for nose. So I worked for with him maybe for 4 or 5, maybe 4 years. We worked together, and then we got married, and then I had my daughters. And then you can go to the next
Yeah.
slide.
I actually, it's funny because I totally believe that, like, my wife and I have also traveled, and I think if you can travel with somebody, and especially outdoors and things like that, like if you're able to do that, I think there's a bond that gets really
Yes.
strong from that experience.
Yes, yes, no, totally. And I totally agree. I think this was like the common ground that we had. So this is one of the, like, this is like we running the course in the Amazon. We were doing like Canadian boats. That's how we say. Very super fun and very wild as well. Like we would travel for 30 days. We would not even see one person. And if we met someone, it's just like indigenous people living there, very beautiful. We can go to
Yeah.
the
And
next.
where's this photo?
This photo is, the name is Aripuanã. It's
Okay.
in the Amazon in Brazil,
Okay. So you actually,
central.
and you're using canoes. You're using Canadian canoes.
Canadian canoes, exactly.
Nice.
Because NOS is American. It's an American organization, right?
Oh,
So,
okay. So they had those.
so all the gears, all the students, they're all American. Only, and they travel in different countries. So this time we were traveling in Brazil. So we
That's
helped,
funny.
and that's what my husband was doing. He started the NOS branch in Brazil. So
Okay.
I helped
Nice.
him to set up this. So then it was just my passion of life, of like traveling and visiting beautiful places. So after that, I just travel again for the. I traveled, I think, 4 months in Asia, and then I went to Bhutan, Myanmar. It was really beautiful, and I think I can. I think we can. I don't think you can go to the next one, but I think what I would like to share. So this is, I met actually again. We did this um, hike in Nepal. It was really beautiful. So as you see, like every opportunity that we have to be outside and doing outdoor activities, this is really like our passion. And what I would like to share, I think, let's go to the other one just to see if I can. Yeah, so these are the course that I worked with him in Alaska, in the Amazon, in Mexico. So we had a lot of adventures together working
It
for
sounds
Knowles.
like it. I'd
Yeah.
like to, we only have a few more minutes, but well, 10 more minutes, but I'd like to talk to you a little bit about, like, all this love of nature that you've had. I'm going to stop presenting for now.
Yeah.
Um, and you and I have worked now a little bit in the past for probably over a year now. We met through the Alana Institute Foundation, the amazing work that you're doing with children. And then, you are now the Nature for All American co-chair. And I'd like to talk a little bit about, your love of nature started off at a very young age, it sounds like, and you've taken that passion and you're trying to inspire other youth and encourage them to fall in love with nature. Can you tell me a little bit about that work that you're doing to share your passion and I guess transfer it to the next generation? I think that's such important work.
I think, Joseph, when I look back to my childhood, and when I look back to my life, I just cannot imagine someone living and getting raised away from nature. I just it's something that I cannot even imagine, like, and I know that kids now, they suffer for nature deficit disorder because of the growth of urbanization. So it's just something that it was so important for me. It raised so much like my values and all my passion. And I said, no, I have to do something just to share my love of nature, and making sure that every kid in the world, has the right to be raised in nature, and to develop this love of nature, especially now that we are facing this climate crisis, that not necessarily kids, they have the opportunity to bond with nature, but they are already like learning in school that nature, that we are facing this crisis, and they get threatened by nature, like they've been having like ecophobia, like, oh, nature, like, I don't know what is going to happen to the planet. So unfortunately, sometimes I think kids are getting introduced to nature more in a threatened way, instead of like in a bonding way, like in a loving way, So I think our the work that we've been doing so far, it's very urgent, it's very serious, not only because of the planet, that we really need to work for it to make sure that we are not gonna get extinct, but
Right.
also for our well-being, for our for our development, for our mental health,
Yeah.
So I cannot see myself working with a different thing. I think
Mhm.
this is definitely my purpose in life. Just making sure that people, um, that they have opportunity to develop their love for nature, because it's
Right.
really a foundation for everything.
Yeah.
It's a foundation for every rights that we have, because we don't have human rights does not exist if we don't guarantee nature's rights, right?
Yeah.
So I think, if for me, it's an honor to be part of Nature for All, and also to be co-chair of Nature for All US, because all the values that we've been working with, it's very current
Yeah.
in my heart. It's
Right.
extremely what I believe. So it's an opportunity to work with my purpose. And I think
Yeah.
it's very, very urgent and serious. And we need to work endlessly to
Yeah.
make it happen.
And you're involved in this greening school grounds project that's underway, correct?
Exactly. Yeah. So, I mean,
Tell us a little bit about that one. I think, it's a Nature for All project as well, and it's been going on for almost a year now.
one
And
year
I
and a
think that's
half.
such an important project, I think, and it's a global project as well.
Yeah, because we understand, for example, if you want to have contact with nature, and in this context of urban growth, that not 87% of the kids live in cities already, we need to work in a more systemic way, not necessarily like only like giving them time to spend time in nature, but also to offer nature for them, and also to make sure that where they are and where they live, it's a nature rich place. And these days, kids, they spend a lot of time in schools, and so we advocate for greening the schoolyards, just to make sure that whenever kids are, they have time to spend in nature, and not only to spend, but to learn in and from nature. So this program that we are partner of with Children Nature Network, what we've been doing so far is to map out all the successful cases of greening schoolyards in the world, and bring light to these cases. So there is this website that you've shared, that we highlight there 13 successful cases. We map out like more than 200 cases of good
Wow.
cases of greening schoolyards, and we also created like a document that we people can use to advocate to have more green schoolyards, because all the research is evidence based, that kids who have the opportunity to play in green in with nature and have their schoolyards greener, it's very important for their development, like in a broader way, like very holistic way. So so this is a movement that we are pretty much advocating for every children. They have the right to play and interact with nature in their schoolyards, and not necessarily the schoolyards are inside the wall of the school, but also outside. So we are trying to help that all the cities as well, they become more greener and also child friendly cities as well, so kids have more access and contact with nature.
Yeah, I think it's such an important project. And I think you've touched upon this, but I'm going to ask you anyways. You know, nature, we have this thing called nature for all, and I think, you know, you embraced it right away, but what does that mean specifically to you? Like, what does nature for all, when you think about it in a little bit more deeply, what does it mean to you?
I think Nature for All is a movement that pretty much tries to scale up the work that you've been doing. It's an opportunity, for example, to meet other people and other organizations that have the same mission and join forces. Just to make sure, like, whatever you do, maybe you can have more collaborations, and you can also collaborate to someone else project, and then you're gonna have more impact. As I said before, I don't think we have a lot of time anymore. I think we this cause that we are working, it's very urgent and serious. So we need collaboration. We need to work together just to make sure that we are very efficient, and also our impact and scale are bigger, stronger, and wider, right?
Yeah.
So I think Nature for All, it's amazing because it's just an opportunity to put us together to our peers, to other organizations that are also doing amazing work, and then we can see synergies that we can collaborate with, and not in reinventing the wheel. So let's just, like, whatever you do, if it maybe helps me to do what I'm also doing, let's do it together and reach like a wider audience.
Perfect. Lais, muito obrigado. I don't know if I'm saying it properly, but thank you so
Yeah.
much for sharing your story. I think it's very inspirational. Thank you for agreeing to be, you know, one of our moderators as well. It's extremely
Oh, thank
appreciated.
you.
And I really
Such a
look forward to
pleasure.
continuing working with you in the next few months and years, hopefully.
Yeah, likewise, Jose. Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's also a big pleasure to share my love of nature and also to listen to others' love of nature. Thank you
Perfect.
very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. All right. That was awesome. We are going straight into our next interview, and I'll stick around as well. And this one, I'm really looking forward to it because I've known our next presenter or speaker for almost 2 years, I think now, and we've had the opportunity to work on a really interesting project. And I'm going to bring him in, and he can talk a little bit about his love of nature and the project, and go from there. Jacob, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, Jose, I'm so happy to see you. I didn't know you were going to be moderating my presentation, but what a surprise.
I know, and we've got the same background. Isn't that amazing?
Well, we're going to fool everybody. Everybody's going to think we're sitting in the same spot somewhere up
exactly.
north, but we are not.
All right. So, Jacob, tell me, like, I know I've known you for a while, but I don't think I've gotten this story from you before. So I'm looking forward to hearing it. So, you know, where does that love of nature come from you? And then we can talk a little bit about what you actually do. But I think I'd love to hear that. Like, how did you get to where you are now? Like, what is it about nature that really connects with you? And how did it happen?
Yeah, that's a good question. And to clarify, we've actually known each other. It'll be 3 years in June.
Oh, wow. Is it that long?
Yeah, it's been a while. So yeah, my story, I guess, let me just start by saying I was lucky enough to grow up with a family and in places, a family that, you know, encouraged the use of outdoors, being outdoors, but also living in places where there are always natural spaces to go play. So that right there is where it starts for me. I mean, and that's just the truth of it. And so, you know, from there, I, you know, took a circuitous path to where I feel, to what is my current sort of relationship with nature, and it's really fundamentally based in sound. And you know this about me. I view the natural world through the lens of sound, and so that's what I'll talk about today. Can I share my screen with you now?
Yeah, you should be able to. It should be pretty straightforward, I think.
Okay.
You do the present, and then just share a window, and
I'm going to share this one, and it should be popping up.
Yep, and let's go there.
Yeah, and I think instead of waiting to the end, I'm going to just start with what I think Nature for All means, or at least what it means to me, because at the foundation of everything I do is, I think, at the heart of what Nature for All is. It's working together to provide access to opportunities, to have opportunities in the outdoors, to form relationships with the natural world, and sort of tap into our evolutionary underpinnings that is within all of us. Some of us, we may be more in touch or in tune with that connection than others, but it's there for everybody. And it's important that we all sort of provide each other access to make those connections. And so everything I do, I think, is underscored by Nature for All. And so keep that in mind as I go through and sort of tell you my story. Jose, you know me as an audio guy, a sound recordist. That actually all began in 2015, right after I finished my PhD work. I came out to Colorado to start work with the United States National Park Service. And within a month of being on the job, they sent me to Hawaii. They were like, "Hey, you want to go to Hawaii? You want to?"
It's a bad place to go.
Yeah, it was a very lovely, welcoming gift. But they wanted me to run this educational booth for this National Geographic event on the island. And essentially I was there to talk about natural sounds and night skies, but focus on the sounds. And my boss at the time said, "Hey, we have always thought about maybe incorporating recordings of wild places into our work, really hi-fi recordings of these places. Do you have any interest in trying that out?" And I said, "Sure, I'll give it a shot." And so when I got to Hawaii, I took all those microphones that I didn't know what I was doing with. I found a really beautiful spot in Hawaii Volcanoes Park. And one morning I made my first recording ever of a natural space. That recording now lives on the Hawaii Volcanoes National Park website, and it's the Dawn Chorus at Kapuka Key. And I start with this obviously because it's the first recording, but it left such an imprint on me that day. I immediately knew this is the way I wanted to form a relationship with nature. It was through sound and using those sounds to not only connect myself to those places, but to tell a story to connect people to those places. And so from there, it just kind of spread like wildfire. As I mentioned, I was working as a partner for the National Park Service. I live in Fort Collins, Colorado. My backyard is essentially Rocky Mountain National Park. I can be there in less than 45 minutes. And so I started collecting audio recording gear, making trips up to the park, living in the backcountry for days on end, recording sounds of Rocky Mountain National Park. And this is what I would look like as I wandered around the park. I would have fuzzy microphones, one in my hand, one on the back, and I was looking for anything interesting acoustically to record, individual species, events, places, you name it. I was recording it, and I was, in a way, documenting what this place sounded like.
You must have stood out pretty much against all the other backpackers and the hikers, I'm assuming, right?
Well, at first, absolutely. I really quickly, I learned to be able to do my work and not get interrupted every 5 minutes by questions of, what are you holding? What are you doing? Yeah. I learned to get off the trails and get into the backcountry away from people. But yes, early on, it was quite obvious I was different than everybody else. I recorded scenes like this, winter landscapes and soundscapes in the park. I got to see beautiful sunsets and the sound of dawn choruses as the sun came up over, this is Hallett Peak in the backcountry. I just just fell in love with it immediately, and I just poured myself into it. And I'm telling you, it was every week, 3 or 4 days a week. I was up living in the backcountry, recording these sounds. I at the time ran a research lab. I had students who worked with me. I did everything I could to take them out into the park with me, to teach them how to record sounds, to teach them how to interpret the landscape and the soundscapes that we were listening to. And so this is an image of one of my students who were recording the elk rut, although there are no elk right here at this moment. But this is likely what we would have been trying to record, the sounds of these big males bugling. Just to bring it to people. Not everybody can make it up to Rocky Mountain National Park. Not everybody even knows what an elk is. So I think it's important that we start at the fundamentals and start to bring that to people. And so, I worked in Rocky Mountain, and I'm still working in Rocky Mountain National Park. In 2020, after about 5 years working up there, a fire burned through the park, really hot, really fast. And it took some of my favorite places that I had worked over the last half decade. And I was kind of bummed out for a while, but then I said, you know what, this is an opportunity to understand the impact of fire on the landscape. And so I went in and I put microphones everywhere, inside and outside the burn scar, to listen to the sounds of the ecosystems as they recover, to learn what species are impacted and what that change looks like over time. And this is a study that continues to this day. Shortly after starting work in Rocky Mountain National Park, I set up a collaboration with people at Yellowstone National Park up in Wyoming. And my first trip was a memorable one. It's really, 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 really what cemented my dedication to using sound as a conservation tool, because on that trip, I saw a pack of wolves, and specifically that wolf you're seeing on the left in the back, the darker one, that is 926F, or Spitfire. She's a famous wolf. She was the daughter of American Wolf, who was another famous wolf in the history of Yellowstone National Park. I recorded this pack, including 926F, on this trip shortly after, maybe a year or so after she was shot and killed legally by a hunter outside of the park boundaries. And so I turned her story, that story of seeing her and her loss, into a piece I wrote just to mourn that moment and that loss. And so that's the idea of the kind of things I'm doing with sound, using those recordings to connect people to, in this case, an individual wolf in a place.
Yeah. So when you started, though, in recording, it wasn't necessarily the conservation aspect that you were focused on, was it? That kind of grew into it.
Exactly. They wanted me to just tinker with the idea of recording sounds, just to put in an archive somewhere that it might get used one day. And real quickly, I just knew the power of sound to sort of conjure up emotions and memories in people. And so I knew real quickly this was a way to sort of approach conservation. And so that's what I decided to do. And so that article I wrote about the wolf, 926F, was one of the first efforts in doing that.
Right.
I also, in the park, took, again, a bunch of students with me to teach them how to use sound to record change in the park. So soundscape ecology is a term we use. It's the idea that we can use sound to understand the health of an ecosystem and to understand the change over time. So we held workshops up there on how to use setups like you're seeing here. This is a microphone setup with a weather station. And so that was a real joy of a project that went on for 3 years up there in Yellowstone National Park. Around the same time, I got invited by Sequoia National Park in California to work on a project there that was entirely dedicated to using sound to connect visitors to the ecosystems of the park. So the idea was to record all of these sounds from the foothills all the way up to 14,000 plus feet, to tell a story about elevation along a drainage in the park, along one of the main river drainages, and the species that live at the different elevations, and the different sounds of the ecosystems along the way. And so I spent over 2.5 years in and out of the park, a week or so at a time, wandering all around, recording the sounds of places like you're seeing here, winterscapes like you're seeing here. That's a 2,000 plus year old sequoia tree covered in fresh snow. It's 180 feet tall.
So when you look at this photo, what's the sound that evokes in you? Because most people will see a photo and it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but most people will see this and they'll see an image and they'll, maybe it'll be smell, or maybe it'll be touch, or, a feeling. But it sounds like when you see this photo, the sense that gets evoked is sound. And I'm wondering, what's the sound that you hear when you see this photo?
That's a great question. And in any photo that I have taken or was present for, the first thing I almost do is think about the sounds associated with it. That's how much sound is important to me. And so here I can just hear the sound of big snow globs falling off the trees to the ground. I can hear the sound of chickadees sort of up in the canopy, and I can hear the sound of woodpeckers pounding on the side of these trees, and the wind. The wind is always the biggest thing moving through the tops of these ancient trees. And so, but it's also largely a soundscape of silence. There's just, as you know, winter, it's insulating. It's so quiet, it's almost deafening, and it's just a wonderful feeling.
It is. I love winter camping. It's just, it just removes all the sounds, and you can really pinpoint just tiny little, even the pitter patter of like a squirrel, or in the background, fairly far away, and you just hear it and it just takes over. It's pretty powerful.
Yeah, it's also hard to capture in a microphone because how do you get people to listen to silence? So, but if you've experienced it, you know exactly what we're talking about.
Yeah.
That project in Sequoia National Park culminated in a few different products. One of them is this ArcGIS story map that you can view on the park's website. Again, it's an interactive way to explore that watershed from 14,000 feet down to the foothills and the sounds associated with the species and places. If you go into the visitor centers, there is a short film, 8 minutes long, of the sights and sounds we captured on that project. They will be on display in the parks for the foreseeable future, and well into the future. And so if you go in and listen and watch it, that was something we worked on. Can I share the link? I possibly can if you stall at the end and ask me some questions, and I can multitask.
Well, I think I might have found it. I'll put it here. And I can share that.
Also,
but it sounds like...
what you can do, or you talk and I'll type.
And I think, the sounds, for me, I guess one quick question then would be is, you're out in the nature, but how are you often how often do you get distracted, I guess, by the sounds of people, or of unnature, I guess, if you will, like planes and other noises? How do you, is that are you finding that there's much more encroachment?
Yeah, that's always a challenge. What I often present is the best of the recordings. What you don't hear are 90% of the recordings that are filled with aircraft flying over, cars driving by, people talking and yelling, music playing, all that stuff that comes along with sort of modern life. And so what I often do is present the moments where that didn't happen, but it's a challenge. You end up having to spend a lot of time out there to find those uninterrupted moments.
But from a conservation perspective, I would think that the other sounds as well that you are capturing are as important, right, to study, to know what's happening in this out there, so that we can see what's happening as well.
That's exactly it. And the team I worked for at the time, that was their entire focus, is quantifying the impacts of noise pollution. First of all, quantifying how much noise pollution there is out there in our wild places, but then also the impacts on species, on these places, and on visitors and their enjoyment when they go to these places. So that was front and center of the work that we did. Everything I'm talking about now is an offshoot of what we did. It was just an effort in communications that I sort of put forward for about 7 years.
Right.
Oh, I'm on the wrong screen. There we go. And so just real quickly, I traveled all across, especially the Western United States, up in the Pacific Northwest, Oregon, Washington. Here is Lewis and Clark National Historical Park. I spent a lot of time up there also creating an ArcGIS story map of the sounds that Lewis and Clark might have heard as they reached the Pacific at the end of their journey in the 1800s. And then up in the boundary waters of northern Minnesota, right where it borders Quetico Provincial Park in Canada, I spent 8 days by myself canoeing a 50-mile loop of the boundary waters. And as you can see in the picture here in the foreground, my fuzzy microphone is right there with me. And, being up there away, I went days without seeing people, 4 or 5 days by myself. And as important as that was to me, it was equally important that I started capture those sounds to bring back with me to share with people. And so I did some of that as well. And that's quite a challenge, 120 pounds of total equipment to portage around by yourself.
I bet. Like it's not, when people go out usually in the bush like this, they usually just bring food and their sleeping, equipment, but you're lugging equipment as well. Like that. Did you have to portage as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think I had a total of, I think it's 14 miles on land. And, it's broken up over 8 days, but still
that's a lot.
Canoe, equipment,
Packs.
Everything total was 115 to 120 pounds. And I don't double portage. And so I just put it all on my back at once.
Oh, wow.
And carried it. And it was a challenge, but
I bet.
It was life-changing and it was life-shaping. And then in 2019, this was really the final piece of the puzzle for me as far as using sound for conservation and sound to start conversations around our connections with the land. So back to nature for all. And so I put together this project with National Geographic called Voices of a Flyway. And I spent 2.5 months on the road from coastal Louisiana all the way up the Mississippi River to northern Minnesota. And we went and we talked to the people living along this river to understand the relationship with the outdoors, but also the threats to those relationships because of our mistreatment of the natural world. And so we documented those stories, as well as documenting those ecosystems and the species living in those ecosystems with pictures, with video, and most importantly, with audio. And so here you see me on coastal delta of Louisiana, right on the Gulf Coast, early one morning, recording the sounds of this marsh. Further up, you get into these bottomland forests that are used to be so much more prevalent across the Mississippi Delta region of the United States. But they're absolutely beautiful if you ever get to visit them. Further up, you get in these just amazing pine forests. Again, so many of us have never had an opportunity to see what the piney woods looks like because there's so little of it left. And then as you make your way further north, we went into farm fields in Iowa to record the sounds of the biodiversity that was there, to understand what that was like. And then some of the last remaining ancient tall grass prairies. You're thinking, this doesn't look like a prairie to me. And it's surrounded by trees that have grown up, but the majority of what is here is a tall grass prairie that would have existed across much of the central part of the United States until it was plowed up. This piece was never plowed, fortunately.
Right. And
then that trip ended in Voyageurs National Park in northern Minnesota. So really the entire flyway, the entire length of the Mississippi River, doing that work. And so that right there, that project is Nature for All. It's allowing people to connect with these places, tell their stories, and giving everybody an understanding of how our relationships are threatened because of how we treat the natural world. Yeah. And then a couple more things real quickly, and then we can get into more of a conversation. But a lot of this work, all these recordings that I've made all over the United States, and I've made some in Central America as well. But I put together a podcast with Scientific American called National Park Nature Walks. You basically get to go to these places with me, and it's like you're hiking with me, and I'm interpreting what we're hearing along the way. So that was a fun project. This one just came out this month, last month, January, Terra Firma with Colorado Public Radio. This is really a meditation. They're really short episodes, 10 minutes long, but it's a meditation on nature, our relationship with nature, and sort of what we want our relationship with nature to be moving forward. And so just really beautiful essays written by our collaborator, C. Marie Furman. She just put brilliantly into words so many of the thoughts that I have had in these places. And so you can listen to the sounds with her essays coupled with them.
Nice.
And then last but not least, something that is near and dear to your heart because you are a collaborator on this project. Jose, at the beginning of this conversation, mentioned that we've known each other for quite some time. I wrote a piece in The Hill in, I think, May 2020 about sort of the threat of COVID pandemic and how it was chasing us indoors away from natural places. Well, I argued that this was an opportunity to reconnect with natural places. Even though we were largely stuck indoors, we could connect with these places through our ears, through all these recordings that I made, and allow people to travel, to find some sanity in a time when sanity was hard to find. Well, word got around about this article, and then eventually Jose and a bunch of collaborators from Parks Canada, National Park Service, George Wright Society, and IUCN, we got together and we said, I think we can do something with this idea. And so that something was Sounds of Your Park. It's a sort of an auditory adventure around the world where people get to submit their high quality recordings of natural spaces around them. We put them on this map, and it gives you an opportunity to listen to those places and learn about the places that have been protected that allow these sounds to exist. And this is an active project. We're still adding sounds to this map to this day. And I just figured, and this is a Nature for All project. And I figured this was a great time to sort of reignite people's interest in it so we can continue to fill in gaps on this map that you can see currently exist.
Jacob, I don't know if this is going to work, but can you pick, I'm assuming you've probably listened to every single one of these by now, if not more than once. I'd love it. I mean, we don't have that much time, but I'd love it if you picked one that you like, and maybe we could just listen to it for 20 seconds, and it'll be an interesting experience because we're doing this live on video, but we're actually going to like stop and just listen to sounds of nature here, and it'll be an interesting experience, I think, but I don't know if it's going to work, but it'd be kind of cool just to kind of get this immersive experience right now.
Yeah. So can you see, let's see. Let me stop sharing for a second.
Yeah.
And then let's go back in, and then let's share.
I have the website open if you don't, but I think you probably do as well.
Can you see it now?
Yeah.
Yeah. I immediately I'm drawn to Africa. Is it these banjo frogs?
Or Australia.
Or Australia, sorry. I'm just drawn to this recording. Because it's so different than what I'm used to hearing here in the States. But this is a good idea. This is a good example of having an opportunity to travel somewhere else just by slipping on a pair of headphones. And so this is sound of these frogs, these banjo frogs in Victoria, Australia, in a wetland that was recorded back in 2015.
I don't know if it's working.
No sound?
When you...
Should I pause and try again?
Yeah. So if you click on, you might have, so if you click Chrome tab at the bottom, there's a little shared tab audio. Maybe that wasn't clicked. Maybe that wasn't clicked properly.
There we go. Let's try this again. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's try this again.
That works. I can see why they're called banjo frogs.
You know what? I was thinking I'm gonna stop that one, and I'm gonna travel back since this was a focus of my story. I'm gonna let people hear a little bit of those wolves that I recorded in Yellowstone, if they're on here. Here we go. Is that all right with you, Jose?
Yeah. We still have time, and we're still waiting for our next presenter. He hasn't showed up, so we can take a little bit more time.
Okay. So you tell me when you want me to stop it. I'll just let it play.
Yep. That's pretty haunting, isn't it? Like there's so much feelings that evokes when you hear it.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's that opportunity to feel that sort of vestigial wilderness that lives within us.
So what's the hope with the sounds of your park? I mean, we've talked about this, but like what do you see the potential of this space, like from both because there's two components. If there's a conservation component, there's an education and a communications component as well to a broader public. So what do you see the potential of a place like this from a conservation perspective?
I mean, the first thing, it always goes back to allowing people to form a relationship with the outdoors. That's sort of the low-hanging fruit there. To form a relationship with a place, you have to know about it first. And this starts to allow people to know about these places. Some of them are quite famous, like Yellowstone National Park. I'm sure people around the world know about it. But some of these other places, they're not as famous, but they hold just as an important key to the health of this planet as Yellowstone National Park. And so that's important. Number two, if people form the connection with these places, they can start to care about them. And so if we can elevate the knowledge that these places exist and the threats that they might face, then we can form sort of a collective of people who are willing to work to protect these places. And the part that doesn't get talked about very often, but is just as important, is once we are in these places and we're interacting with them, what do we want that relationship to look like? Do we want it to be something that is sustainable moving forward? So other people can have that experience as well. So future generations can have that experience as well. And so this is a part of my work that I'm starting to explore more. And it's tough because you don't want to tell people how to experience the outdoors, how they should conduct themselves in the outdoors. But at the same time, I think we have it's required of us, it's imperative of us that we do the best we can to protect these places. And so trying to strike that balance of gently saying, if you're going to be in these places, treat them with respect, treat them, I think religion gets held in such high regards around the world, especially our places of worship. You step into them and all of a sudden we speak in hushed tones. What about if we stepped into our natural spaces, our forest cathedrals, and treated them the same way, with that reverence and that awe and that respect? I think that would go a long way towards not just protecting them and allowing others to have those experiences, but allowing you to look within yourself and explore what your relationship is with that place, what you enjoy about it so much, and
Right.
and how you want those relationships to evolve over time.
I think that's a great way to end our conversation. The next speaker is ready to go. Jacob, thank you so much, and I'm really looking forward to continuing working with you on this project. I think there's a lot of potential. I think there's a lot of interest as well. I pumped it up. I was at a recent conference on marine protected areas, and I think there's a lot of interest to bridge that gap between the scientists and sharing those sounds. Like, they're taking these sounds, but sometimes it's like, what else can we do with them? And this is a great opportunity to bridge between communications and scientific research and sharing both sides.
Yeah, thank you for amplifying the work. You know how important it is. And also just for this whole My Nature Love Story opportunity for amplifying what I do and the message I'm trying to put out there. And I think it's a wonderful thing you guys are doing. So thank you.
That's good. All right. Thanks, Jacob. Appreciate it. And I'm going to kick you out of here. And I am extremely pleased to present our next speaker. He's coming in from Lake Louise Soho National Park. I'm going to bring him in, let him introduce himself. But Blake, you're outside. What's going on?
I am outside. It's a wonderful snowy day here in Lake Louise, Alberta, broadcasting live from Banff National Park in Western Canada. So I work for the Lake Louise Yoho Kootenay Field Unit of Parks Canada, and that is Banff, Yoho, and Kootenay National Parks. So we're here today in Lake Louise. We're expecting 20 to 30 centimeters before the end of the day. So we might get a little bit of snow during the broadcast, but I'm excited to talk to you today about whitebark pine. You might not have ever heard about this species or about five-needle pine in general, but I work with a team of staff across 7 national parks, including Yoho, Banff, Kootenay, Jasper, Mount Revelstoke, Glacier, and Waterton Lakes National Parks. And we work together to share what Parks Canada is doing for five-needle pine in the mountain national parks. So you've heard me say five-needle pine. What does that mean? There's some pine trees that live in this area. You can actually see sort of where their habitat is over here. So on the mountain behind me at the top, when we get closer to the tree line, this is where we typically find five-needle pine. It's called five-needle pine because the needles are in bunches of 5. This is an easy way to tell them apart from different trees that live in the national parks. So as we can see, there's quite a few trees here. There's no shortage of them. However, most of these species that we find here are lodgepoles and ponderosa pines. They're not necessarily providing the same aspects to our ecosystem that whitebark pine does. So these 2 trees, whitebark and limber pine, are considered at risk. Whitebark pine is an endangered species in Canada, and it's the first endangered species in Western Canada. Limber pine is being recommended for endangered status by a group called Coswick, which we have here in Canada. So it's soon to follow, and it faces the same risks as whitebark pine. So, Jose, I don't know if you're sharing slides.
I can.
If you want to share just the next slide.
Yeah, I
Awesome.
can present the slides. Hold on a second as I get there.
Thank you. Well, I'll talk a little bit about what Parks Canada does, because we do a lot of work across the country. And so we have a couple different types of sites. We have national parks, national historic sites, national marine conservation areas, and we're starting a national urban parks program with Rouge National Urban Park in Toronto being our first. We also have a team of about 8,000 staff in the operational season. We are spread across the country and do a lot of interesting work. We work with different collaborators, Indigenous communities, and public educational like organizations, that kind of thing. So we have a lot of different projects on the go, and Five Needle Pine is just one of them that we're working on out here. So Jose, if you want to skip to the next slide, it's just a map of Parks Canada's system across the country. So the purple rectangle that you see is where the mountain national parks are located, and the red star is where I am in Banff National Park. As you can see, lots of different parks across the country that have a lot of different important roles in preserving Canada's natural and cultural heritage. All right, so if we look at our next slide, I've got a couple pine cone pictures showing the difference between whitebark and limber pine. So whitebark pine is known to live at those higher elevations. It's pushing near or at the tree line, versus limber pine grows a little bit lower. The whitebark pine cones, the female ones especially, have like a purple brown color. The limber pine cones are like a lighter brown and a little bit bigger. Both trees can live for up to 1,000 years, and we have examples of whitebark pine living for up to 2,000. So they can live for a very long time, and it's because the location that they live is pretty harsh. So I said that whitebark pine is endangered, it's a species at risk, and limber pine is soon to follow. So if we look at our next slide, I've got some amazing photos of where whitebark pine lives. It's a keystone species, which means it's extremely important in the ecosystem and plays a vital role in preserving it. These trees regulate spring melt. So you can see there's a lot of snow up here. And when it warms up in the spring, the snow tends to melt down the side of the mountains. Whitebark pine is able to hold onto snow in its needles and regulate the spring melt, slowing it down and providing an essential water source to other plants that live up there as well. So it's a really important tree to have in the area. They also stabilize the slope and provide a lot of really beneficial services to the ecosystem. So if we take a look at our next slide, there's a really good diagram that was drawn by one of our staff at Parks, and it shows how extensive the root systems of whitebark pine can be. So if you look at those roots, they really hold on to snow and dirt and rock and material on the mountains and stabilize it in place. And if they weren't there, a lot of that material would end up eroding down the side of the mountain. So they play an essential role in that way as well. The seeds are about 52% fat and have a lot of protein. So they are a choice source of food for a lot of animals in the upper or subalpine ecosystem. Really important trees, basically. Now, because of their unique nature and services that they provide, they've also been used by Indigenous groups since time immemorial. We can see this through both natural and cultural contexts. So the seeds are a really important source of food, especially in the winter. They can be raw or roasted, mashed, mixed in with berries, a lot of different ways to eat them. We've seen this in a short-term context and a longer-term context in terms of a food source. And we've seen them in archaeological sites in a variety of places. The bark and roots of whitebark pine are water resistant and watertight. So they've been used historically for canoes and containers. The bark is the primary part of those, and then the roots are actually used to sew them together. So it's a really important tree. And lastly, the inner flesh, so the cambium and secondary phloem of the tree, that vascular tissue that lives on the inside and it provides the nutrients up and down the tree, has been used for food, but also medicine. They provide um, they're a good medicine source for ulcers, and we've seen that indigenous groups have harvested these trees responsibly. Because they live for such a long period of time, we can actually see the scars on the trees where this tissue was collected. It was done so in a way that would preserve the life of the tree and its fitness. It was usually done on the north side, and the scars are still there. So we can see just how important these trees are to the ecosystem and to people that have lived in this area for thousands and thousands of years. But if we go to our next slide, some of us might have heard about Taylor Swift's love stories, but I really need to tell you about this one between the whitebark pine and this bird. It's called the Clark's nutcracker, and it was actually named by Lewis and Clark when they were exploring this area. And individual birds, so they eat the seeds, and they have this very specialized beak. So the beak is evolved to break open whitebark pine cones, extract the seeds, and each bird has a pouch under their tongue. It's called a sublingual pouch. They can fit up to 150 seeds in their pouch at one time. So these birds will go from tree to tree, from cone to cone, collecting seeds from different places, storing them in their mouth, and then they fly across the landscape to cache these seeds. So the Clark's nutcracker will dig a little cache about 1 to 3 centimeters deep, and they'll store about 3 to 5 seeds in the ground. One individual bird can do this, up to 98,000 times in a year. Why so many times? That seems like a lot of extra work. Well, the Clark's nutcracker returns to about 50% of those caches, but something very special happens to some of them. But most of them are eaten by grizzly bears, squirrels, and black bears. So in order to have enough food, the Clark's nutcracker must do a lot of work ahead of time. And, it's a very special bird. It follows Parks Canada's advice of becoming prepared. So we see this bird in the fall digging a lot of these caches. The ones that aren't consumed by the nutcracker, the ones that aren't consumed by other animals, actually germinate and become whitebark pine trees. This is the only way the tree replicates and spreads. So it's a very important relationship between the Clark's nutcracker. It's what we call a mutualistic symbiotic relationship. Now, the Clark's nutcracker needs a lot of food, and if those cones are not being produced, if those trees aren't there, the Clark's nutcracker looks at other food sources, and that relationship between whitebark pine and this bird is potentially lost forever. So, it's a very important bird, a very important tree. The thing is, whitebark pine cones don't open on their own, so the Clark's nutcracker must crack them open. They're that purple color. When the birds crack in these cones, they get this like purple sap all over their face. Super interesting thing to see, a very squawky bird. What about limber pine? Well, this is the limber pine cone I have here. As you can see, they open up. So the seeds are able to be exposed. Animals can get in there, but the thing is they don't have wings. So a lot of pine trees rely on wind distribution to get the seeds to different areas. Limber pine doesn't have that. So it also relies on the Clark's nutcracker for spreading its seeds. How are we doing so far, Jose? Well, I'll assume things are going well.
Sorry,
so
yes,
we've
they
talked
are.
a little bit about this relationship between the Clark.
Great.
Oh, awesome. Okay.
Sorry. Did you want to? I'd love to ask you a few questions, or if you want to go through, if you have more slides, we can do whatever you want.
Oh, I've definitely got some more slides, but for sure, if you have any questions you'd love to ask at this point, I'm all ears.
I'd love to know a little bit, so we both work for Parks Canada. Obviously, mine is a desk job, and yours is not. And I'd love to hear a little bit about that. that inspiration that brings you to learn? Like, I'm assuming that, 5 years ago, you probably weren't an expert on these pine cones and these trees. But what is it that inspires you to learn about these species and to work to protect them?
That's a really good point, Jose. Prior to 2020, I had zero clue what a white bark pine tree was. And I've learned a lot over the past couple years from our Parks Canada staff. We have a lot of teams of staff in our different parks that are working on projects like this and have been doing so for a long time. With white bark pine, Waterton Lakes National Park has been working since 2009 and doing a lot of the prep work before that to get this to get our conservation practices with white bark pine established. And it's just, especially with this tree, I think, we have a lot of species at risk in Canada. Like a grizzly bear, for example, is one of them. It's a big animal. It's charismatic. It's what we consider a megafauna. So people see these species and have that emotional connection to them. But with white bark pine, it's a species that most people might not ever interact with in their life. As we can see out here, most people are operating in the valley and on the lake at Lake Louise, and not many people necessarily always make it up to the tree line. So they might not ever see this tree. And considering the conditions it grows in, those really rocky, harsh areas where no other species will kind of go until white bark pine is there, it's a foundational species. I kind of consider it the underdog of the tree world out here. And I think giving these trees a voice and sharing the work that we're doing and why they're important is just means a lot to me. So that's basically why I've taken the time to talk about these trees out here.
Cool. And maybe you can, I do want to go back to your presentation. I think it's important, but I also want to know like a little bit about your journey to where you are now. Like you said in 2020, you didn't know about these trees, but what is it, do you remember when that first connection with nature happened, when you fell in love with nature? Maybe tell me a little bit about that.
When I was growing up, my mom made a specific effort to, when we were doing little trips or traveling around a little bit, we mostly focused on exploring different parts of Canada. And when we would go on different trips, we usually ended up in a national park somewhere. And so I've had that connection to these areas since I was younger, and have, more recently through school, understood a lot of the like ecology and science behind why these areas are so important. And I honestly just, biology amazes me every single day. You learn something new and different interactions and that kind of thing. Every time I go outside and look around here and think about those different connections, it really inspires me and gives me some positive energy that makes my day.
That's cool. Okay, we can get back into your presentation, but thank you for that. I think it's important, sorry, I disappeared. For people to get that connection, and to realize that, we all have that connection with nature. So I'm going to share the PowerPoint again if you want, and you can tell us a little bit about the next one, which is the threats to the five-needle pine.
Absolutely. So white bark pine is listed as an endangered species for a reason, and there's some main threats that we've identified that are causing its decline. The biggest one is a fungus called blister rust, and it appeared in North America about 110 years ago now, but it's decreased the individual fitness and immunity of these trees. So it's a yellow colored fungus, and when it invades a tree, it usually flags a branch. So we'll see these green trees with an orange branch, and that shows blister rust has infected the tree. From there, it attacks different aspects and the fitness of the tree. Unfortunately, in most cases, we see something called top kill. So the top of the tree, the crown of the tree will no longer be able to produce cones, and basically that tree will no longer reproduce. So blister rust is a problem, and it's one of the more significant ones affecting white bark and limber pine. It spreads really easily, and it can either kill or decrease the fitness of the tree. So that's one thing. The next is mountain pine beetle, and I've actually got one over here, a very large scale model I can show you of a mountain pine beetle. So these beetles are actually native to the area, and they infect other trees, not just white bark pine. But when they're at epidemic levels, they're able to hop from tree to tree and to different species. So we see this as a little bit of an issue out here.
Blake, I want you to show that
is,
again. I want you to show that beetle again, but make sure people realize that that's not to scale, right? Like,
yeah,
otherwise,
well,
I'd be scared. Like, how much bigger is it, or is it pretty close? Because that'd be
well,
scary to see.
I know it's a very giant beetle. So this is actually 20 times life size.
Okay.
So it's not this big. This is actually one individual pine beetle. If you just can see the size of it, it's pretty small. And I've got some larvae here too as well. So those are the larval stage of mountain pine beetle. So what does this beetle do? Well, it infects the inner tissue of the tree. You can see some of the marks that the mountain pine beetle has left on this piece of bark. So we've got these lines here. Sorry, I don't know if this is coming through, but you can see it over here. So when you combine the decreased fitness that comes with blister rust and then the mountain pine beetle, which is also attacking the tree, things are not looking great. There's more though. Climate change is one overarching issue that white bark pine is dealing with, and it allows other species to move up the mountain towards the tree line. So you can see those like lodgepole pines, they're progressing upwards. We're having more trees and they're coming in closer contact with white bark pine, taking over its habitat. Climate change is also thought to be supporting mountain pine beetle outbreaks. So it's kind of connected to a lot of these. But when we see those trees moving up the mountain, it brings a lot of fuel as well. So fire is a big part of the white bark pine story, and fire suppression is something that's been happening in this area for the past 100+ years. So with fire suppression, typically this area sees low intensity burns that happen about maybe every 20 years, and it creates this mosaic model of severity. So we have areas that might be burned a little bit more intensely, others that are a little less, but just different environments. Since fire's been suppressed in this area, you can see the uniformity of species of trees and distribution. It's pretty solid. There's a lot of fuel out here. If a fire were to burn, it would be extremely high severity, killing a lot of the wild vegetation that's out here, and not really positive for white bark pine. So it's something that we've had to take a look at. So a lot of different threats there though. Blister rust, mountain pine beetle, climate change, and fire suppression. What are we doing about this? It sounds like it's a doomsday. Well, Parks Canada is doing a lot of work, especially with their collaborators, to support white bark pine conservation. And the first thing that we're doing is planting. Sounds pretty simple, but it's actually a very intense process. It starts with some surveys that our teams do. So they go into white bark pine stands and they're looking for blister rust resistance. It's something that occurs naturally in some of the trees, not very many, a couple individuals out of 100. So it's something that you have to really keep your eye out for, but it does exist. When we see when we identify those trees, we actually put what we call these wire mesh cages on the cones. So this allows them to still have access to oxygen and they're still able to mature, but we protect those cones from birds like the Clark's nutcracker. There's actually one over there, but they are protected from animals, birds, so that they won't be consumed. Our teams go back into those stands, harvest the cones, extract the seeds. Most of them are sent to a nursery and are planted. And a couple of them are preserved for that genetic diversity component. They're sent to seed banks. Those seedlings grow for about 2 years in a nursery and are then returned to the mountain national parks. So that addresses partially the blister rust problem. What about mountain pine beetle? There's a pheromone called verbenone, which is actually, it's a terpene that's a chemical compound that the mountain pine beetle will express itself if it's feeling a little bit stressed or in a high density situation. So when the mountain pine beetle goes into a tree and there's a lot of them, they'll express this verbenone. And this is something that we're able to use to our advantage. So we've isolated verbenone and are able to attach it to trees and basically trick the mountain pine beetle into thinking the tree's already infested. So the mountain pine beetle will avoid those trees. We typically do this again for either those resistant trees or the ones that have a lot of cone production, just to make sure that they have that added level of protection.
So, Blake, I'm gonna have to kind of, we're nearing the end of our conversation, so I'm gonna try to get you to start wrapping up. But I think what I'd be interested in knowing is, what is the type of work, or what are you doing in Lake Louise right now to get other people interested in this? Like when you're talking to visitors, and how do you get them to realize what those threats are? What's the work on that front when you're interacting with other people on the ground?
Absolutely. Well, this tree is obviously really important. And so the educational aspect around the work that we're doing is also an important factor. And we're trying everything that we can. With us, we have a website. It's parkscanada.ca/2pines that has a lot of information. And it also has a 6-minute documentary that shows exactly what we're doing out here and how and why. So I really encourage people to check it out. But one really interesting communications tool that we use is a mural. So we worked with an Indigenous artist. There's a couple photos, I think, in the slides, but it's in Calgary, Alberta, and it shows the work that Parks Canada is doing for white bark pine. So there's a lot of different aspects that are included in the mural that are really interesting. And Mackenzie was able to also incorporate some of her Cree background into it. So it's a really awesome mural. There's a lot of people working with 5-needle pine across the country, whether it's communication staff like us or fire and veg teams that are actually doing the work on the ground. We also have interpretation teams that lead guided hikes about white bark pine. So you can come into Yoho National Park and experience it and see for yourself the conservation work that we're doing. But since this is a tree that was relatively recently endangered, we still have a lot to learn ourselves at parks. Yeah. And so we rely on citizen science a lot. There's an app called iNaturalist. I think there's a slide for it as well, Jose. And it just shows, how people across the world can be part of citizen science and record observations. So if you're in the backcountry and you live near a national park, you can actually go and take photos of trees. And if you think it's a white bark pine, you can upload those photos. Someone will verify that. And it really helps us with our known occurrence data. So there's a lot of different things that we're doing out here, but all for the love of trees.
That's awesome. And I hope that, when people do visit, they get to talk to you, because your enthusiasm and your passion about what you're doing is contagious, I think. And I think it's important that we strive to inspire others to find that love in nature and to connect with nature. And so I'd like to thank you for taking the time and being outside. There is snow on the ground. I don't know how cold it is, but the snow is looking like it's starting to fall. So you probably should get inside and warm up, but appreciate you taking the time out today.
Thank you so much, Jose. I really appreciate it. I also just need to show everyone there is a lot of people out here. It's a great time in Lake Louise, but I really thank you all for taking the time to listen to how we're supporting Whitebark Pine.
Perfect. Thanks, Blake. Appreciate it. All right, that was Blake, and we've got our next guest, and I'm going to bring him in right away so that we can have a conversation. He's got his video camera on. We're not sure if it's going to be working, so we may just switch that, but we'll see how it goes. Stephen, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to be here for this week-long celebration of Nature for All. It's an honor.
That's awesome. All right. I'd love to hear a little bit more about you. And so we'll just get right down into it. I know you've got a podcast. It's amazing. I encourage people to listen. We'll share the link in shortly. But tell me a little bit about your personal story of how you got to connect with nature in the first place.
Well, my first experiences with nature was when I was a kid or a young adult. I would play in the woods around our house. And I wasn't so much for the nature part, but it was more for just going out and playing. And it was a place that I really felt comfortable with, being in the woods, using my imagination, and just being creative. And then later, you go to school, you get into all that, the normal things in life, and you kind of lose track of that. But in my late teens, I was really heavily influenced by a lot of the Impressionist painters. And I loved the way they would paint things, and in particular, nature. And I really wanted to be an artist, and I studied art. But as you know, that's a hard way to make a living. And I sort of gave that up and went into other things. But when my wife and I bought our first house, there was a garden there that had been overgrown and kind of neglected. And I went out and just figured I was going to make it look better. And I slowly got involved in plants and color, but and it really triggered something in me, but it was the artist that it triggered in me. The garden became like this canvas, and that I looked at it as plants and color were all part of my paints. And so I became fascinated with gardening. It became a passion. And the more I did that, just naturally, because one spends so time in nature, right, and in that process, I slowly went from the artistic part of it to the natural part, to the nature part. And I started learning about nature. And I spent 20 years, or the last 25 years, being a gardener. I developed my own gardening business. And gardening really became it just became this incredible place and this incredible teacher about so many things. So that's how I sort of got back into the nature part of it.
Right. And that's interesting. You mentioned art, because a lot of the people we've been talking to, they've been across the board. But, when you think of conservation, I think a lot of people think of, scientists and biologists and conservationists. But I think there's obviously a space for artists, and you found your space in that. Like, tell me a little bit about how that art started that journey to conservation for you, and how that can help move the movement.
Well, I'm not so much sure that it moved me to conservation in that sense. What I think really happened for me is in the garden, and I would like to say that nature is very creative. In fact, I have a podcast coming up called The Abstract in Nature, in which I talk with an abstract painter about, and he says he's totally influenced by nature. So how does nature create these abstracts? But that's another story. So, but But for me, is that the creative part of gardening led me to learn about not only the plants, but about myself. The garden and nature has so many things that it teaches us that aren't necessarily nature, but they're related to it. For example, the garden taught me how to be patient. The garden taught me how to deal with death. The garden taught me how to deal with failure. The garden taught me how to have a community, and why communities are important, because plants live in a community and you can see them working together. So there's all these different aspects. And what it really showed me was the relationship between me and nature. And that's where it taught me so much. And that's where my passion for my podcast and the other thing that I've done is to try to get people to understand that in so many ways, it's the relationship that really matters. We have the science. We know there's climate change. We know there's global warming. But we're not going to change anything until all of us have a personal relationship with nature. And that when you have that personal relationship with nature, and it can be in so many different ways, that's why I have a podcast, and we can talk about that later. But it's the relationship that is so important when it comes to man and nature, because we are nature. We've always been nature, but we have, for various reasons, we have become to think of ourselves as above or better than nature. And that's why we are in the predicament that we are today.
It's funny you say that. We had somebody else on the podcast earlier today say the similar idea, right? That we seem to have forgotten that we are that connected with nature. It's not to nature, but we are nature. How do you, we'll go back and forth on this, but how do you use your podcast to reaffirm that connection for your audience and even for everyone, right? Like, how do we do that?
Well, let me kind of just talk about how I got to my podcast. So,
Sure.
so after 25 years of working in the garden and becoming, I got to the point, actually there was one day I was in my garden and I really had this very incredibly moving experience where I really kind of looked at this space and it was so wonderful and beautiful. And I felt like I needed to give back to that. And to call it nature, but I wanted to give back. I wanted to say thank you for what this whole experience had given to me. So I decided that I was going to make a film. And I made a film called Negotiating with Nature. And I spent 3 years on it, raised some money, and I put it together. And I thought it was I thought it was a pretty good film, and it got good reviews. But if you know anything about film, particularly in the U.S., it's a really, really hard medium to break into. It's a tough one because the technology that allowed me to make a film without any experience, and it was technology that allowed me to do that, also allows everyone else to do that. And so a lot of people are making films in wonderful ways, but it just means there's a lot of them out there. So after I finished the film, it was really hard to show it, I would try to get it into film festivals. I would try to, I showed it locally, but it's a really tough medium to break into. And I got really discouraged. I thought, oh man, I borrowed money that I paid for. I worked hard on it, and it just, I would go and show it in places and 10 people would show up. So it was really discouraging. But there was something in me that said, but I'm not going to give up. I'm not. And I was not really aware of podcasts, but I had heard about them. And so I started listening to some of them. And I got this, it just, there again, something clicked when I realized that maybe a podcast is really what I can use to get even a bigger message across than my film. Because one of the things I realized in my film is that I would go and talk to people like Doug Talmy, and I would interview him for an hour and a half, and he would give me wonderful things. But when it came to the film, I could only use, because of time restraints, I could only use maybe 5 minutes, and all that other stuff just went somewhere. And then I listened to these podcasts, and I realized I could have Doug Talmy on my podcast, and I could let him talk for 30 minutes, don't interrupt him. And that's a much more powerful thing. So so I decided that I was going to start a podcast. And that was 4 years ago. I'm beginning my 5th year. And I called it Nature Revisited, the podcast, because I feel that I hope that expresses what I think we need to do. Again, we need to revisit where we are. And that sometimes you go in the past in order to go to the future.
Right.
And so what I really feel, the one things that my podcast is all about is giving people who have a passion and have a relationship with nature a platform, so that my audience can listen and hear that somebody that really loves butterflies has an incredible relationship with butterflies, and that relationship is wonderful, and it's just as important as that person who has a relationship with the forest, or the artist. That we are a community, and the more people can hear about different relationships with nature, the more they hopefully people will say, well, I'm going to find my relationship with nature. And so that's what I try to do with my podcast, is give some incredible people a platform to share with others.
That's amazing. I pick up on the one word that you use is relationship. And that's an important one to have, right? If you don't have that relationship, if you can't relate to something in the environment, it's going to be very hard to want to protect it. What are some of these relationships, and how do they manifest that you've heard from the people that you've interviewed? Like, how important is that relationship in the work that we're trying to do?
Oh, it's huge. It's huge. And before I go there, the idea of the relationship is that once you become a relationship, and there again, that's why you call it a love fest, that you fall in love with nature. And just like nature, you don't harm things that you love. I wouldn't harm my daughter. I love her. And if we love nature, we're not going to harm it. So some of I've had some guests trying to think. Doug Talmy comes to mind, a man who I've interviewed 3 times. Richard Louv, I'm not sure if you're familiar with his book that he wrote, the classic, The Last Child in the Woods. He talks about that relationship and how we've stopped allowing our children to play in nature. And these different stories and how they relate. I did one with a surfer, and she talks about her relationship with the ocean and the wave, and how that brings her closer to nature. And so she's working on in a global way to try to save our oceans. There's a lot. I have almost 90 episodes, so
yeah. And it sounds like you've created these relationships, and I'm sure some of them, you would have never thought of developing as when you started this almost 5 years ago. how has your perceptions, or has your, I guess, you talked a little bit about when you were making your movie, there was a little bit, that enthusiasm maybe had, waned a little bit over the last 4 or 5 years. Like, how has your enthusiasm, how has your connection and these relationships changed you, and if it has?
Oh, it has changed. It's like nature itself again. I've had these conversations, and I've worked with people, because I do my podcast in, I think, a slightly different way than some. All my guests, I talk to them beforehand. I do if they've written a book, I read their book. I send questions. We work on the questions that we're going to talk about. So we work together to present the episode. It's not just and such. So I've talked to some incredible people who have some incredible passion. I can remember one of my not favorite, but my the closest, the one that I cherish the most is episode number 3 with a guy named Jeffrey Reddick, who is an African American who's serving out a life sentence in a North Carolina prison. And what he does is he paints pictures of nature, of his farm that he remembers at his grandmother's, and tulips and stuff. And I was able to have an interview with him in prison and talked about why was it that nature, of all the things you could do in prison, you went to painting pictures of nature. And he talks about how that's what gives him life. That's that connection. So for me, that's incredible there is this inherent connection we have with nature. And so talking and putting these episodes together has enriched my life more than I can ever say. It really does. And it seems like every episode we raise the bar a little higher. And I'm now getting people who are calling me that they want to be on my podcast, which is wonderful.
Well, and yeah, that's great. And I think that's one of the key things, isn't it? Where we have to raise the bar a little at a time. We don't, it's the little actions that we can take, that will make a difference. And it's interesting how, you started off with a moment in your garden to where, you're connecting with all these different people, sharing their stories with you. And I think that's powerful.
Yeah. And there again, one of my favorite guests on my podcast is a lady I believe well, Cheryl Charles, who started the Nature and the Children in Nature Network, and that she's been involved in Nature for All. I mean, there again, that's what Nature for All is. It's not that I can tell, but it's building a community, a global community, and that's wonderful. That's what it's going to take for us, and you're doing it in a way that the whole idea of think globally but act locally. You're very much in tune with that.
Yeah, and I think what we're trying to do through Nature for All is really, give that concept of Nature for All to people. It's not mine to keep or to give. I think it's yours. It's everyone's, and I think that's kind of the hashtag behind it, right? It is for everyone, and it can be used by a variety of different people. And I know you've used it, but when you hear the word, just the words itself, Nature for All, what does that invoke in you?
Well, actually, it just popped into my head. One of the stories I'm reading right now is a book that hasn't been published, but it's called Soil, and it's by a lady named Camille Dungy, and it's called Soil, and she's a African American mother. And reading that book, I've and I have been wanting to have an African American on my podcast from the beginning. So when you talk about nature for all, there are communities. I mean, people think, well, of course nature is for all. It hasn't been for all. The African American in this country, the Latin American in this country have suffered, have been excluded from our relationships with nature. I may be wrong on the date, but it wasn't until 1948 that African Americans were allowed to go into national parks.
Wow.
I mean, how crazy is that?
Yeah.
So I love the title Nature for All, because there again, that's what it's really important that people, indigenous people, communities, they feel completely left out in this discussion. And so that's why I think,
and yet, and I don't know if I've lost you, but and yet they're the ones that are most connected to nature. I think a lot of indigenous communities know that they are one and part of nature, and I think a lot of the Western society has forgotten that.
They have. And hopefully I think from some of the podcasts and the people I've been speaking with, I think I don't know, it's still going to be an uphill battle, but yes, all around the world, there are governments that are trying to get rid of these cultures so that they can have their way with their land and different reasons. But yeah.
We're running out of time. I know that we could probably talk for a lot more, but what do you see? You've done this for almost 5 years. How do you see Nature Revisited over the next year? What would you like to accomplish? Are there specific things, like you talked about having an African American? What is it that you're hoping to move the needle on specifically from your? I think we've all got, one of the things with Nature for All is we accept that every organization has a niche. They have their unique way of going about their work, and at the end of the day, they are trying to protect nature or to connect people with nature, and so they each have their niche. And I think you've found your niche and you've developed it into something that's sustainable and enjoyable. I think that's one of the key pieces. And so what's your next hopes for the next year and for the next 5 years, if you will?
Well, one of the things that I really pride myself on Nature Revisited, and most people talk about this, that in nature, diversity is the most important thing. And I feel that on Nature Revisited, I have a very diverse set of guests. So what I hope to do is I hope to do this as long as I can and have as diverse a group of people, of guests on it as I can. And I think that's my hope, is that the more diversity there is out there that I can share with people, the better. And that's what I want to continue to do.
Nice. That's nice. I'm curious. You talk about your garden, and
it's right over there.
And I'd like you to, if you can, in the next couple of minutes, like, walk us through your garden. What do you see, and how do you feel when you're out there? I think it obviously has had and has or plays a very big role in who you are and where you've become. And I'd like to try to envision, when you're out there, what do you see? How do you feel? What is it that really connects you with that space?
Well, at the beginning, I was out there all the time. And I was looking at everything, and it took probably about 10 years to create. And even then I didn't, but I was involved in everything. And it was this relationship with nature. And so it was the creation of it. After it was created, then you can only go so far in some ways. You would add and subtract that. And that was part of the lesson that I learned from my garden, is that at some point I realized that nature was was doing just as much as I was, and that I could step back and let nature do more than I was, and it could still be a beautiful garden. That I have actually gotten to the point where my garden is somewhat self-sufficient, that I let nature do what it does. I go out and enjoy it, and I walk through it a lot more than I did. And what I will do, I spend maybe a couple of serious days at the spring, summer, and fall to do maintenance or whatever. But a lot of the work of creating it and establishing it has been done, and the garden lives on its own. And I let things happen. I let nature do things with it, and I see it, and I let it go. If something shows up in one of my flower beds that I didn't put there, I will more than likely say, well, nature put that there. And unless it's an invasive species, I think I'm going to let it stay there and see where it goes. So my relationship with nature with my garden is, I think, very much in tune with my relationship with my podcast.
Great. That's interesting. That's really neat. So, and back to your podcast, we're just going to wrap this up, but
okay.
I posted a link of your the blog and the Noorden Productions, but where can people find your podcast?
They can find Nature Revisited on any podcast server, anywhere, and they can find it on YouTube. All my episodes are on YouTube, and you can also follow me on Noorden Productions. And on Noorden Productions, you can watch I did do 2 films. One was on nature. The other one is on a brickyard. But they can follow the podcast and the film. But we are available on any podcast server out there.
Sounds good. We'll make sure we go in and listen.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate the conversation, and continue sharing the love.
And we'll continue to work together. I know we've been working with Jesse, and I hope to keep our relationship strong.
Sounds good. Thank you so much, and have a great end of the day.
You too. Thanks.
Bye. All right. That was awesome. We do have one other special interview today, and it's not actually live. This is a pre-recorded that my colleague did not too long ago, and it's a wonderful story. And if I can find it, and this is a wonderful story out of the Easter Islands, and of bringing in intergenerational connection with nature. So I'm going to share this now because I think it's really interesting and a great story to have.
Where you got your start in conservation, filmmaking, and cinema, video?
Absolutely. Well, in terms of connection to nature and the values associated with all of that, that was probably pretty early on. I did a lot of different nature-oriented things as a kid, between camps and just spending time out in nature as much as I could. Whenever I was not doing homework, it was all about nature for me, and getting more full immersion experiences through going to summer camps and things like that, in different places. I did it several years at a camp in North Carolina. I also grew up in Peru, and spend a lot of time in really beautiful places there. So I think that the diversity of places, and then the camps after summer camp in the Carolinas, I did one in the Caribbean. I got to do one in Europe as well. That was really cool. So those were like really formative experiences. And then I did high school in Connecticut, boarding school that was just, stuck in the middle of the woods. So we did a lot of, outdoor stuff there as well. I mean, I always wanted to, and I was looking for experiences in nature, and as I started to get further along in my academic experience, I started to learn more about, sustainability. And that kind of led me to work in a conservation type space where it's like I've been doing for the last 20 years different versions of that, sustainable development. Cinema part, it's been more or less a hobby. Like I was, even as a kid, I was always into recording and taking pictures, but I never really took it very far. I was just always had a camera with me. And then when I left the States when I was 30, to move back to South America because my parents had moved back. But before I moved back, I traveled the world for a while, and I went to a bunch of different places, including the Himalayas, right? And it's like, so I obviously took cameras wherever I went. And when I was in the Himalayas, I had this crazy experience. I'm talking about, sustainability stuff, this a climate change experience back in 2010, where there was this flooding that happened and we were in the middle of it. And so like I filmed all of that, and then eventually it was so intense as an experience that I put together like a little quasi, documentary about it. I got a fair amount of attention because I was like the only person who filmed one of the flooding events, like the actual moment of bridges being torn down and stuff like that. So that got me more and more interested in doing that type of work, even though I have never actually professionally gone into doing it.
Mm-hmm.
But being here now in Rapa Nui, it's nowadays it's even more common as a means or a medium for communication.
Right.
The visual arts are really a way to get the word out about different things. So we've found different ways to integrate that into the work, because a lot of it is really like boils down to generating awareness. It's like get people to care about this stuff. And how do you do that? You make really compelling visual art. Yeah, we were really excited about that. I mean, we got there's a small team, you can see it in the credits, not that many of us,
Mm-hmm.
On a really tight budget, but we did, I think, a really cool series within it's in what we had available to us, and the kids did amazing. I was so impressed with how the kids just like they had all this confidence, and they and persistence, because a lot of times they have to repeat the same lines over and over
Right.
again, but they did it with the best of energy. And it was like seeing how because the whole initiative is like empowering young people, right? With like they can be the change makers. They can literally influence others and make change happen, and I saw that coming through with the way that they participated. They were like, in the process, they were becoming empowered, and that was really cool. I think that kind of comes through in the videos themselves.
Yeah, and in both cases too, they kind of get that knowledge from their grandmother or someone in the family, kind of passing down that knowledge and kind of understanding the depth of why it's so important. Which, like you said, it translated so well. So.
Yeah, that's the that aspect is like something that we thought was really important in general, obviously, to have the intergenerational dialogue and connection, but it was also something that's very important locally. So we were trying to be as sensitive to the local culture and customs and the passing on of knowledge in indigenous populations around the world, and especially in this one is like fundamental, and so like we try to keep that in the video. But nowadays it's like the truth of the matter is it really boils down to the message. Obviously there's a quality thing, like you want it to be good quality on the technical side, but doesn't take a huge amount of doing. You don't need massive cameras nowadays for that. You just need somebody with the basic good equipment and an idea of what the shot should look like. But then it's about organizing. It's about the team. It's about the purpose, the intention behind the video, thinking it through in terms of how you're going to present it and all that. That's really where the magic happens, and anybody can do that. It doesn't take a huge amount.
It's like storytelling at the base of it,
Right.
Any visual.
And that's actually what.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. In the visual medium, and the fact that it wasn't really that difficult or expensive to do, once it was produced and we saw the impact of the effect, made me start thinking like, how cool would it be to have this sort of approach to getting awareness about an issue become a commonplace thing? What if like other indigenous populations somewhere else in the world saw these and were like, how cool, we can do something just like that here,
Right.
And did a similar model approach to the video, getting out whatever it is that the theme, it could be any kind of a theme, but using a kid as a protagonist and an elder as somebody who they interact with, and then get out some of the best practices as well as some of the cultural ways that they used to do it, type of thing.
Is there a reason why you have been honing in on youth in conservation specifically?
Absolutely. The mayor invited me to join up because he is in developing a relationship with the United Nations so that the island may become it's called a territorio espejo. It's like a mirror to the world, like an exemplary, ideally an exemplary place in terms of the implementation of the sustainable development goals, right? And so we have a long way to go, but like he's like, we need, professionals who can help us, get us oriented. And so I came on board with that intention. And as we got into it, it's obvious that like all sustainable issues boil down to values, right? And so like, to what extent are the collective values strong enough to counteract all of the trappings of modern society, if you will. And how do you foment those values? And then like we started to get into the role of the institution itself, which had all these issues, and we started to work on those issues with the adults, and we got some progress, but it's tough going. And after a while it's like, what we really need and should be doing is focusing our energy on the younger generations, because that's where we can, that's where there's still a lot of malleability and like and energy and vision and innocence and all these other great qualities that young people possess. And so we started to focus in on that. And I actually had already been working. One of the first things I did when I came was to try to implement a methodology that I got to know when I was living in Peru. Before coming here, we lived in Lima, and I got to know, in fact, a very close friend and was my neighbor, the founder of ANIA, it's the Asociación para la Niñez y su Ambiente. His name is Joaquín Leguía, and he's a leader in the region for connecting young people to nature. His foundation has been doing it for over 25 years, and he said, if you can take the methodology to Rapa Nui, it would be amazing to have it out there. And I did, and we managed to get it implemented in the schools, and so that was a big part of the work. And one of the results of that was or an evolution, I guess, of that natural process of bringing that methodology here, was to get look for different ways to empower young people. Beyond this, the methodology itself is oriented toward like school gardens, and the kids have their own spaces that they plant, they care for, and and they learn about a number of different issues, and they become they empowered by that process, where it's also associated to creativity and creating art and creating music and books and all kinds of stuff. And that's where the videos eventually came around. But it was also a result of so one of the things that he managed to do in Peru was to get one of the municipalities, the municipality of Lima, to implement a municipal ordinance local legislation that recognizes young people as change makers for sustainable development. And he said, well, you want to try taking that to Rapa Nui? I said, oh, let's do it, And we managed to do it. And it was like in April of this year, it was approved unanimously, and everybody's like, okay, this is great. But nobody really knows what it means, but it sounds great, It's like, but what it means is we need to start looking for ways to actually do it. And the videos were the first step toward doing that. It's like, this is how we recognize, we empower them, we give them the camera, and then give them the confidence and work with them and empower them so they take the message and they can inspire other people through that. Now, the ideation process is a fascinating one, and it involves a number of different people. The ideation process was very collaborative. It was like, let's talk to this, the grandmother over here who knows a lot about the earth, and let's talk to this, old guy here because he's an expert on the water issues and things like that. So like, and the lady who's worked in medicinal plants, that's the lady who shows in the video. She's the one who's been an expert in that field for decades. And the kid in that video is my son, Kai. He went and did the casting all by himself, and he got selected. It was really cool. And the guy who he interacts with, it was a close friend, and it was also randomly selected. he works at CONAF, which is the National Forestry Association, and basically his job is caring for the soil and planting trees. So he's like a local expert in that. So that was a lot of what the ideation came about by identifying the local leaders in each one of those disciplines.
You already kind of touched on it a bit, how you guys are continuing this project, but I guess my last question was more so, do you have other projects in the future that you're excited about, or that you're looking forward to, or that you'd like to start?
Yes, we're all at Twitter about continuing. It's really exciting. In fact, I'm just starting now to the process of ideation around the next 4 videos that are going to cut the sort of continuation of this model that we came across, that we created. And I think they're going to be even more powerful. It's exciting because the ideas that are coming forward are really are really cool, and they go a little bit deeper. They go into more of the tradition, more of the culture, the local way of doing things, more of the unique aspects of that make this island so magical and mystical, so that I think we'll do something really cool with that, and it's going to be exciting. We're doing right now, we're also kind of creating the action plan around the municipal ordinance, the legislation, to bring that to fruition, and that's a big part of it. They all go kind of hand in hand. It's like we're looking to create committees, youth committees that will be involved in the decision-making process around a variety of different issues at the municipal level, and getting them to participate via whether it's forums or questionnaires, or actually actively in a committee, getting more of the content out there as well. We have this like a full CD of songs made by kids.
Oh my God.
That's part of the work around the thing. It's like we want to get that to be more, commonplace, like heard, get people to know that stuff, and create more of it. Like we made a children's book we made a competition that, the kids, those animations in the videos were drawn by the kids. We did a competition a couple of years ago, and they created all those little animations. And so we want to take that and turn it into a book and an actual animation, like a several minutes worth of animation. The question that you guys are digging into is fascinating, and I applaud that effort, because it's really at the root of what we as sort of a human species need to work on. Is how do we get ourselves to really reconnect and value nature again, the way that we used to.
All right, thank you so much for taking the time. All right, have a good day.
Great meeting you. Take care.
All right, that ends our session for this portion of the Love Fest and my sharing of stories. We will be back in approximately 5 more hours with more videos, more interviews. It'll be a lot of fun. It'll be interesting. It'll be inspiring. I hope you can join us then. Check us out at on our YouTube page at Nature for All, and you can join us live in about 5 hours. Thank you for joining, and we'll see you all soon.